Paul writes to this group of people and says, I know you know how challenging this stuff is. And I encourage you, go back and read 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians, the entire chapter. 2 Thessalonians is pretty small. It's only 3 chapters. But he writes, he says, and I know that you get this. I know that you understand. I know that you've done this. But what gives me great heart is that despite all of the opposition, the faith is still growing among you. That your works are still available for people to see, that you're still carrying out the message by which I have given you. And so as Paul is closing this letter to this community, he says, pray now. Pray that the Lord's message will spread rapidly.
All of the blessings that you have for me, open up the floodgates. 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 Your rain. Your rain. Your rain. Your rain. Magnify the Lord with me.
Jesus says about his own ministry that his ministry is about bringing good news to the poor, proclaiming release to the captives, allowing the blind to see, allowing the oppressed to go free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come. If we're not careful, we may inadvertently be thinking that the message of the Lord is only about heaven. But Jesus steps into a message that is not only about heaven, but is about right now. Message. Why would people at this moment be so willing to hear this? Paul is writing and he says, I want the message to spread, but first I want to make sure you got the right message. I want to make sure that you understand what we're talking about, that yes, Jesus is about life that will come, but he's also about life right now. He says of himself, I come that you might have life and that life more abundantly. He ain't just talking about later, he's talking about now. The Lord's message, he said, I want this message to spread. But even if you look in Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul recognizes, but there's some other problems. There literally is an anti-Christ message happening. The anti-Christ message is anything that is anti or against, contrary to the message of Christ. Very clear. Right? It is very clear. And in fact, if you go back to 1 John chapter 2, it talks about the Antichrist. In fact, it has Antichrist and Antichrists, right? So it's not just one person. Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 writes of an individual who will become an embodiment to this message, this idea that is completely adverse to Christ. But what he says is so pernicious. What he says that is so challenging is that it will look close, but be based upon lies. That it will be so close that it will fool even the believing. That now the man of lawlessness will come based upon lies and be able to move and hurdle and take and hurt a whole group of the believing community because it sounds like, it looks like it's close to, it might be right around in the periphery of us, but it ain't the Lord's message. And it could be us if we're not careful to know the Lord's message. That his message is connected to his life, his death, and his resurrection. How he lived is important. How he died is important. And the fact that he got up is important. I'm going to come back to that later. But we have to hold all of them to rightly understand how the message is now, or we, even under the name and guise of Christ, could be moving an antichrist agenda.
Send it